My name is Serena Calloway. I am 34 years old, and the moment I want to tell you about happened at a Thanksgiving table set for 18 people in a colonial house in Clover Hill, Virginia, where my mother-in-law placed a plate in front of me with exactly 3 slices of turkey and a single spoonful of stuffing, while everyone else around that table received full carved portions, generous ladles of gravy, and bowls passed their way with warmth and ceremony. She did it in front of her entire family. She set that plate down in front of me, looked me straight in the eye, and smiled. Not the warm kind, the practiced kind. The kind that says, I know exactly what I am doing, and there is not a single thing you can do about it. The kind that has been rehearsed over years and deployed at family tables as a form of language that only the target is supposed to understand. What she did not know, what she had never once thought to ask about, what she had somehow never been curious enough to wonder about in 2 years and 3 months of monthly gifts landing in her mortgage account, was that the roof over that Thanksgiving table, the heat running through those walls, the quartz countertops in the kitchen she had spent 30 years in, all of it was being held in place every single month by me, $4,000. Transferred from my personal checking account automatically on the 14th of every month for 27 consecutive months. Not in Marcus's name, not from a shared account. From mine, with a memo line that said, Calloway Family Home, and a paper trail that a certified bank statement could lay bare in one full page. $108,000, and she had absolutely no idea. This is that story. To understand how we arrived at that table and what happened when I finally opened the folder, I need to take you back to the beginning. Not to the moment everything broke, but to the moment everything started. To the Sunday afternoon in October 3 years ago, when Marcus and I drove to his parents' house in Clover Hill, Virginia for a family lunch, and I watched his mother, Vivienne Calloway, set the table with the kind of deliberate choreography that only women who have spent decades managing rooms know how to execute. There is a difference between someone who sets a table and someone who arranges a hierarchy. Vivienne did both at the same time, and she made it look like hospitality. Vivienne was 61 years old that fall, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, always in a pressed blouse and sensible heels that announced her presence on kitchen tile before you saw her face. She had spent 30 years as the office manager for a dental practice in Clover Hill, and she had run that office the way a person runs an office when they understand that information is power, and access is the currency of respect. She retired the previous spring and transferred all of that energy, every ounce of the organizational precision and every drop of the territorial instinct, into the management of her family. You could see it in the way she moved through her own kitchen, not cooking, exactly. Conducting. The Calloway house was a 4-bedroom colonial on nearly an acre in a suburb 20 minutes outside Richmond. Robert Calloway, Marcus's father, had bought it in the early 90s on the modest salary of a mid-level logistics manager and had spent 3 decades paying it off and keeping it up. Robert was 64 years old, quiet in the way that kind men who have lived alongside strong personalities often become quiet. He was the kind of man who fixed things with duct tape and never said a word about how long it had taken him to get around to it. He used my name from the very first time we met, which sounds like a low bar to clear, and, I am sorry to tell you, was not. Their daughter Priya was 30, lived 40 minutes away, worked in pharmaceutical sales, and was Vivienne's undisputed favorite in the uncomplicated way that firstborn daughters sometimes are when a family has a gravitational center. Priya had learned to inhabit that favoritism like a second skin, comfortably, without asking what it had cost anyone else. Their son Marcus was 36, an electrical engineer with a methodical mind and the particular emotional patience of a man who had grown up watching his mother run everything and had concluded that the safest response was to not interfere. We had been together for 4 years, married for 2. And then there was me, Serena, Marcus's wife, the one who had not grown up in Clover Hill, who had not attended Vivienne's church or frequented Vivienne's neighborhood, or been filtered through Vivienne's opinion before arriving in her son's life. I was from Richmond proper, from a family of teachers and civil servants who worked hard and expected nothing to be given to them. I had built my career in treasury risk management at a regional financial institution through 10 years of early mornings, a graduate degree I paid for myself through a combination of scholarships and working full-time, and the kind of sustained discipline that does not make for interesting dinner party conversation, but compounds over time into something real. None of that seemed to register for Vivienne. What registered was that I had arrived in her son's life without her approval, and through the inconvenient and unstoppable force of his love for me, I had become permanent. It started small. It always starts small. The first Sunday I came to lunch, Vivienne introduced me to her sister Carol by saying, "This is Marcus's girlfriend. She works in finance." The way she said finance with a slight pause before it, as if she were placing the word at arm's length for inspection, made it sound like a job I claimed rather than one I held. I let it go. I was new. I understood that mothers earn the right to their caution, and that trust does not come with a wedding invitation. The second Sunday, Vivienne had made a full pot roast with all the sides, the kind of meal that takes most of a day and is meant to communicate love through labor. She moved around the table, placing portions on each person's plate herself. She reached me and kept walking. She skipped my plate entirely and moved on to the next person, as if I were a chair that had been accidentally given a seat. I sat in front of an empty plate, and Marcus quietly transferred some of his pot roast to my plate without making a scene. Vivienne watched him do it from across the table. She said nothing. No correction, no apology, no acknowledgement that anything unusual had occurred. She simply moved on to the next conversation. I told myself it was an oversight. I believed that for exactly one more Sunday, the third time it happened, we were at Robert's 63rd birthday dinner. Vivienne had made a pound cake with candles, and the whole table sang, and the room was full of the particular ease that comes with a family comfortable inside its own rituals. When she cut the cake, she went around the table clockwise. She handed a slice to each person with a small, practiced smile. She reached me, skipped, handed a slice to Marcus's cousin 2 seats past me, then doubled back and placed a noticeably smaller piece at the edge of my plate without looking at me or pausing her conversation with Carol. I watched her do it. I looked at Robert. He was studying his fork. I looked at Marcus. He had not seen it. I ate my smaller slice of birthday cake and said nothing, but I filed it in a place inside me that had started keeping records. I told Marcus about it on the drive home from that birthday dinner. The empty plate from the pot roast Sunday, the smaller birthday slice, the pattern that was beginning to have the unmistakable quality of intention. He was quiet for a long moment with his eyes on the road, and then he said, in the tone of a man who has said this before and believes it resolves things, "My mom can be a lot. She doesn't always mean it the way it lands. She just has her ways." I nodded. I accepted it. I kept going back, because I loved Marcus and because I understood that a marriage is not just 2 people choosing each other. It is 2 people agreeing to be patient with entire histories that existed before they arrived. But there is a threshold, different for every woman, where the small things stop accumulating quietly and begin to mean something larger. For me, that threshold arrived on a Wednesday evening in March, roughly 8 months after Marcus and I got married, when I was standing in the kitchen making dinner and heard his phone ring in the living room. I was browning salmon and I heard one side of a conversation that I was not meant to hear in full but could not avoid from 10 feet away. "What do you mean overdrawn?" A pause. "Both of them, Mom?" Another pause, this one longer. "That is not a small number. That is not something you can just absorb." I turned off the burner. I did not move to the doorway. I stood at the stove and waited. Marcus came into the kitchen 20 minutes later. He looked the way people look when they have been handed something heavy and have not yet figured out where to set it down. He sat at the kitchen table. He told me everything. Vivienne and Robert had taken out a home equity line of credit 4 years earlier to pay for a kitchen renovation. The renovation had started as a $35,000 project and ended at $68,000 after a contractor opened the wall behind the old cabinets and found water damage that required structural repair. They had been making the minimum payments on the equity line. But Robert had accepted an early retirement package the year before, a decision that had made sense at the time and had come with a pension reduction that was only now compounded against their existing obligations and their regular monthly expenses, revealing its full consequences. They were 2 months behind on the primary mortgage. The mortgage payment alone was $4,012 a month. Marcus looked across the table at me. He did not ask directly. He is not built that way. He laid it out, every part of it, and let the silence do the asking. I sat with that for a moment, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to understand what I was agreeing to before I agreed. I work in Treasury risk management. I know exactly what a $4,000 monthly commitment does to a household budget over 1 year, over 2 years, over longer. I know what it closes off and what it keeps open and what it costs in the patient accumulation of daily choices. I understood all of that in the time it took me to exhale. And I understood something else too. That house was where Marcus grew up. That was where Robert had built something on a salary that did not have a lot of room in it. That was where Vivian had cooked 30 years of Sunday lunches and Christmas dinners and birthday cakes. And that if it went into foreclosure, Marcus would carry the weight of that for the rest of his life. So I said, let me handle it. What I should have added, what I wish I had added with the same calm clarity, was this: Vivian needs to know it is me. She needs to know my name is on this. Marcus nodded. He said he would tell her. He believed he had. What he actually told her, as I would only understand later, was that he had arranged for the payments to be taken care of. Vivian heard arranged and built a version in her mind where Marcus had set up some kind of professional instrument or financial product that she did not need to understand. She never asked a follow-up question. She did not want to. She filed it under arranged and moved on. I filed it under mine and set up the transfer. I set up the automatic payment on a Thursday afternoon at my desk, $4,000, the 14th of every month. A single recurring line in my budget labeled Callaway Home. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell my closest friends. I told one person, my financial planner Dorothy Sims, a woman who had managed my investments for 5 years and had the particular unflappable quality of someone who has heard the full range of human financial decisions and stopped being surprised by any of them a long time ago. I sat across from Dorothy and told her the full picture. She looked at the numbers for a moment and said, "That is a significant monthly commitment. Are you certain about the structure?" I said I was. She said, "Then let us make sure it is documented correctly from the start." That sentence was the first thread in the rope I would eventually pull. Dorothy helped me establish the memo line language, the paper trail notation, and the confirmation protocol. Every payment that went out was clean, documented, and fully attributable to me. That was Dorothy's doing as much as mine. What Vivian did with the months that followed was continue exactly as before. The payments went out on the 14th. The house stayed standing, and Vivian kept setting the table the way she had always set it. She continued to skip me in the breadbasket rotation on Sunday afternoons. She continued to introduce me to new people by Marcus's profession rather than my own. She continued to ask Marcus about things she could easily have asked me, seating arrangements, holiday timing, dietary preferences at dinner, because routing everything through Marcus kept me at one remove from the center of the family. It was not accidental, it was architectural. In November of that first year of payments, at a dinner for Carol's birthday, she said to the table, gesturing at Marcus with a warmth that filled the room, "He has always been the one we could count on. Always. Since he was a child." She said it looking at him. She did not look at me. I was the one covering the mortgage. I passed the breadbasket. Christmas of that first year, Vivian gave gifts to everyone at the table. She gave Robert a cashmere sweater in the gray he preferred. She gave Priya a pearl bracelet that had belonged to a great aunt. She gave Marcus a vintage watch from his grandfather's collection that she had held for him for years. She gave Derek, Priya's husband, a bottle of good bourbon and a handwritten card. She handed me a small flat package wrapped in the same paper as everyone else's. Inside was a kitchen timer shaped like a tomato, the plastic kind. The kind you find in the clearance bin near the exit of a home goods store. Not because someone thought it was charming, but because someone needed to hand you something, and this was available. She said, "I thought it might be useful when you are cooking." I said, "Thank you, Vivian. That is very thoughtful." She nodded and moved on. I thanked her and meant nothing by it. I brought the tomato timer home and put it in a kitchen drawer where it stayed for 2 years. Exactly where she had placed me. Easter of the following year, Vivienne pulled Marcus aside before the ham was served and asked him, in the hallway outside the downstairs bathroom, whether I had any plans to take his last name eventually, or whether I intended to keep using my maiden name for professional purposes. Marcus told me about it that evening. He said she had phrased it as a casual question, as if she were simply gathering information. I had been Mrs. Calloway for 16 months at that point. My name appeared on the mortgage transfer she received every 14 days. She simply preferred not to register it. September brought a small dinner she hosted for women from her old garden club, 4 of her closest friends from before her retirement. One of them asked Marcus, in front of everyone, whether his wife joined them for Sunday lunches often. Vivienne answered before Marcus could. She said, "Serena is very career-focused. She keeps an extremely busy schedule." Said it with warmth. Said it with a smile. Said it in a way that explained my absence from moments when I had in fact been present. The moment that moved me from patience into preparation came in August, on a Tuesday morning, at 11:40 in the morning, when my phone rang in the parking garage of my office building. It was Janet O.C. calling from her car. Janet and I had worked together for 7 years. She had the directness of someone who has learned that hesitation is its own kind of unkindness, and she led with it. She told me she had run into Priya Calloway 2 weeks earlier at a restaurant downtown, at adjacent tables during a lunch where the wine had been generous and the conversation casual. Priya had mentioned Marcus's wife. She had said that Serena had never really contributed to the family in any meaningful financial way, that the house payments were something Marcus had arranged through professional product, that Serena was, and Janet quoted this word for word, comfortable letting Marcus carry the load. Janet said, "I almost did not call you. Then I decided you had the right to know." I said, "Thank you, you were right." My voice was level. My hands in my lap were absolutely still. I sat in that parking garage for 11 minutes after the call ended. I counted 37 concrete slats in the ceiling above me before I started the engine. And when I drove out into the sunlight, something in me had moved from one place to another, not into anger, into clarity, into the particular focused calm of a woman who has decided that the room in the moment will be hers to choose. Here is what I built in the months that followed, and I built every part of it in silence. The first thing I did was go to my bank and request certified payment statements for every transfer I had made to the Calloway mortgage account. At the time of my request, there had been 27 payments, 27 certified pages. Each one showed the date, the amount, the receiving account, and the memo line. I downloaded the full set as a PDF and printed one copy, which I placed in a plain manila folder in the bottom drawer of my home office desk. I did not label the folder. I did not need to. I knew where it was. The second thing I did was sit down with Dorothy Sims for a longer conversation than usual. I told her everything: the payment arrangement, the monthly transfers, the Sunday lunches, the bread basket, the Christmas timer, the parking garage phone call, Priya's assessment over white wine at a downtown restaurant. Dorothy listened to all of it with the same unflappable composure she brought to every session. When I finished, she said, "You should have a formal letter of record prepared. Something that documents the payment history, the intent, and the arrangement as you understood it to have been communicated, in the event that any of this ever needs to be reviewed by anyone." I said, "Can you help me put that together?" She said, "I already have the form open." The third thing I did was call the Calloway mortgage servicer, not to make any changes or disclose anything, simply to confirm, for my records alone, that the account was current. The representative confirmed that yes, the account was current, had been current for 26 consecutive months, and that payments arrived reliably on the 14th. I thanked her, ended the call, and added a note of that conversation to my folder. The fourth thing I did was continue showing up to Sunday lunches. I helped clear plates. I complimented the pot roast. I said thank you every time there was no other honest response. I brought flowers on 2 occasions and had them received with a nod. I sat at the table and passed the bread basket and observed Vivienne conduct her room and said nothing that was not exactly what I meant. Because the thing about choosing your moment is that you have to do the work of not choosing any of the other ones. Every casual Sunday, every Christmas gift that was not for me, every sentence that moved through Marcus instead of reaching me directly, each of those moments required me to put it down without spending it. That is the cost of waiting. It is not free. But it is worth it when the moment you have been building toward finally arrives and the room is full, and there is nowhere for the truth to go but out. October brought a coordination call from Priya to Marcus about Thanksgiving logistics. She called Marcus rather than me because she always called Marcus rather than me. She told him that Derek's mother Eloise would be joining this year, which meant the table would need to extend further into the living room and some of the seating arrangements would shift. In the new configuration, I would be seated at the far end of the table near the kitchen door. Priya referred to this section as the overflow area, the word used in the same tone as you might describe a parking lot. Marcus told me about it that evening with his careful, neutral expression, the one that meant he knew it was wrong and had decided not to make it an argument. I said, "That is fine." He looked relieved. He should not have been. I was not fine. I was 23 days from being ready. In the weeks between that phone call and Thanksgiving, Vivienne became more present rather than less. She was in full holiday preparation mode, and that mode had a centrifugal quality that drew everyone in her orbit into its orbit as well. She called Marcus on a Tuesday evening to discuss the positioning of the serving trays. She called Priya on Thursday morning about whether the china pattern or the everyday plates were more appropriate for the number of guests expected. She sent a text message to the family group thread, a thread in which my number appeared but to which I was rarely addressed directly, asking everyone to confirm their arrival times. She planned the afternoon with the precision of a woman who understood that control over the details was control over the experience, and that control over the experience was control over the story of the day. I watched all of this from the edge of the thread and said nothing. I confirmed my arrival time. I prepared the honey butter rolls. I reviewed my folder one more time and checked that the certified statement was clean, readable, and complete. There was one more moment from those weeks that I have not told you about, and it is small, but it belongs in this story. On a Wednesday evening in the second week of November, I was in our kitchen making soup, and Marcus was on the phone in the living room with his mother. A call that was ostensibly about Thanksgiving logistics but had drifted, as calls with Vivienne often did, into the broader territory of family news and opinion. I was not listening. I was chopping vegetables and thinking about something at work. But then Marcus's voice changed, the way it changes when he is choosing his words more carefully, and I caught a sentence that he clearly had not intended to carry through the kitchen doorway. He said quietly, "She will be there. She is always there." There was a pause. Then, even more quietly, "Mom, that is not fair." Another pause. "I hear you. But that is not fair." He came into the kitchen a few minutes later and did not mention the call. I did not ask him to. I filed what I had heard in the same place I had been filing things for 2 years, in the part of me that was building toward a single moment with the patience of someone who understands that the right moment, when it finally arrives, is worth every single one of the wrong ones you did not spend. I want to tell you something about those 2 years and 3 months before I take you to the table, because I think it matters. The narrative of the patient woman waiting for her moment can sound like passivity if it is told without the texture of what that waiting actually requires. Waiting is not the absence of action. It is the most sustained form of discipline I know, Every Sunday lunch where I sat at the edge of something I had been excluded from. Every Christmas where my name was not spoken. Every phone call routed through Marcus because Vivienne could not bring herself to dial my number. Every breadbasket that found everyone but me. Each of those moments required an active choice. Not to react. Not to spend the truth before the moment, for it was ready. To put it back in the drawer and close the drawer and sit at the table and pass the rolls. That is not passivity. That is the specific kind of strength that does not have a name for itself, because the women who practice it are too busy practicing it to stop and name it. I know you know what I mean. I know some of you have been doing exactly this, at your own tables, with your own Vivienne, counting your own ceiling slats in your own parking garage after your own version of that phone call. And I want you to know that what you are doing is not nothing. It is everything if you use it correctly. Vivienne spent October in the full production of Thanksgiving preparation the way she always did, with a level of organizational investment that would have been impressive if the energy had ever included me. She called Marcus 4 times in the month about the menu and the centerpiece, flowers, and who would bring which side dish. She sent a group text to the family on the 2nd of November confirming the date and time and assigning items. She assigned me the rolls, not a side dish, not a dessert, the rolls. I spent the Wednesday before Thanksgiving making 2 dozen honey butter rolls from scratch. I proofed the dough that morning, shaped them by hand that afternoon, brushed them twice with warm melted butter, sprinkled them with flaked sea salt, and sent them into the oven at 350 degrees for 18 minutes until they were the color of a good autumn afternoon. I made them because that is who I am. I was not going to be any less of myself for the occasion or for the woman who had arranged it. If you are still watching right now, I want you to pause here for just a moment. If you have ever been the one in your family whose contributions went unnamed, whose generosity got routed through someone else's credit, who sat at tables where the food passed around you like you were furniture, drop a comment below and tell me about it. Because what I am about to describe in the minutes that follow is for you specifically. Subscribe if you have not already, hit the bell, and stay with me through this. Because the room at that Thanksgiving table is about to go very, very quiet. Thanksgiving arrived on a Thursday in late November. Gray and cold the way Virginia can be that time of year when the sky has not decided what it wants from the day. Marcus and I arrived at the Calloway house at 11 in the morning, 2 hours ahead of the other guests, because Vivienne had asked Marcus to come early to help move the furniture and set up the extension. I came with the honey butter rolls in a covered basket lined with a dish towel. I walked through the side door the way I always came in. The door that leads directly into the kitchen rather than through the formal front entry. I set the basket on the counter and Vivienne said, without looking at me, "Put those over there." I put them over there. Robert came in from the back porch and saw me and said, "Serena, good to see you. Glad you made it out." He opened his arms and hugged me fully and meant it. It was the warmest thing that was said to me in that house that morning, and I held on to it quietly the way you hold on to the things that are real. By 1 in the afternoon, the house was full. Vivienne's sister Carol and her husband Warren, who had been coming to this table for 20 years. Priya and Derek's mother Eloise, who sat very straight and said very little and missed nothing. 3 cousins with their children. The Henderson neighbors who moved through the space with the confidence of people who have earned their chairs there over decades. Marcus's uncle Leonard, Vivienne's older brother, who had driven in from Charlottesville, and who had the kind of face that processes everything before he says anything. Robert and Vivienne at their respective ends of the long extended table, bookending 18 people, 2 white tablecloths pushed end to end, gourds and candles and Priya's wicker centerpiece arrangement in the middle. We sat down at 2 o'clock. Vivienne said grace. It was long and warm and specific. She thanked God for her children and their health and their futures. She thanked God for the house that had held this family through 30 years of seasons. She thanked God for Robert's steadiness and Priya's dedication and Marcus's reliability. She thanked God for the neighbors and the cousins and the extended branches. She thanked God at the end for the potential of grandchildren, directed generally toward both ends of the table without specifics. She said amen. 18 people said amen. Robert picked up the carving knife. Vivienne moved around the table with the serving spoon and the ladle, working her way from Robert's end inward with the quiet authority of a woman who has choreographed this exact sequence for 30 Thanksgivings. She was generous as she went, full scoops and heaped portions, the kind of serving that says, I made this and I want you to have it. She reached my seat. She set down one spoonful of stuffing. She moved on. She did not stop at the mashed potatoes for me. She did not ladle gravy in my direction. She continued to the next person and the next without breaking her rhythm. The turkey platter came to me from the other end, passed through 12 sets of hands by the time it reached my place, and what was left by then was the thinner slices and the outer edges of the breast, not because there was a shortage, there was a full bird on that platter, but because the better portions had been served earlier and the platter had been on a long circuit. I looked at my plate. 3 thin slices, 1 spoonful of stuffing. No potatoes, no gravy. A plate that was, with no ambiguity at all, a message. And then Vivienne looked at me across the candlelit length of that table and she smiled. The deliberate smile. The one she had been using for 2 years and 3 months. The one that said, I know precisely what I have done, and you will not say a word. I held her gaze for 3 full seconds. I did not drop my eyes. I did not return the smile. I picked up my fork and set it back down very carefully, and then I said, in a voice that was even and clear and entirely unhurried, actually, before we begin, I would like to say something, if that is all right with everyone. The room shifted. The way a room shifts when a voice enters a space that was supposed to be settled. Vivienne's smile did not disappear right away. It recalibrated. Robert set down his carving fork and looked at me. Marcus looked at me. He had not known. I had decided not to tell him the night before, not out of cruelty, but out of the understanding that telling him would start a conversation about timing and approach and whether to find a smaller moment, and I had waited too long and thought too carefully to trade this moment for a smaller one. A private conversation allows the other party to control the narrative afterward. 18 witnesses do not allow that. I reached into the small clutch beside my chair and placed a folded document on the table in front of me. 2 years and 3 months ago, I said, Marcus came home and told me that this house was in a serious financial situation. The mortgage was 2 months in arrears. The monthly payment was $4,012. There was a gap between income and expenses that was not going to close by itself. I looked at Vivienne as I said this. I was not looking to wound her. I was looking to make certain she was receiving every word. I made a decision that night. I set up an automatic transfer from my personal checking account, $4,000, transferred on the 14th of every month. I unfolded the document and set it on the table. This is a certified payment statement from my bank. It shows every transfer, 27 of them, $108,000. The account has been current every single month. Because of those payments, made by me, I slid the document toward the center of the table. Leonard reached for it first. He read the first page slowly and the second. He set it down and looked at his sister. The silence that followed was not dramatic silence. It was real silence. 18 people processing something that did not fit inside the story they had been living. Robert's hands lay flat on either side of his plate. Priya had both palms pressed against the white tablecloth. Derek was studying a point on the far wall. Elos reached across and took the document and read several lines and set it back down with a deliberateness that communicated everything without a word. Carol looked at her wineglass. The Henderson couple sat very still. Marcus sat beside me and was quiet for a moment that felt full rather than empty. And then he said to the table, I should have communicated this more clearly from the beginning. That is on me. But the payments are from Serena's account. That is true. He put his hand over mine on the tablecloth and kept it there. I am not here to ruin Thanksgiving. I said. I am here because I sat down at this table tonight and was handed a plate that communicated very clearly what my place at this table is. And I think everyone sitting here deserves to understand what my place actually is. I looked around the room as I said it. I looked at Carol, at the cousins, at Leonard, at Robert, at Eloise, at every face that was now looking at me with full attention. I said it quietly. I said it once. Vivienne opened her mouth. She closed it. Leonard said, "Vivienne," one word, her name, like the period at the end of a sentence that had been building for a long time. Vivienne set the serving spoon down on the tablecloth. Robert said my name then, and his voice was the rough, uneven voice of a man who is trying to hold something very large behind his eyes. "I did not know the full picture," he said. "I want you to know I am grateful, and I am sorry." I looked at him. "I know, Robert. I know you did not." He nodded. He did not look away. Priya spoke after a long silence. Her voice was careful in the way voices become when someone is genuinely unsure which way a moment is going to fall. "How long have you known that Mom did not know it was you?" "Since August," I said. "Since Janet called me from that restaurant downtown." Priya looked down at her plate. "I did not mean for that to get back to you." "I know you did not," I said. "I am not here to punish anyone for a restaurant conversation. I am here because something needed to be said out loud, in a full room, in a way that does not get revised by morning." Eloise picked up the certified statement one more time. She read the full first page. She folded it and placed it back at the center of the table and looked at Vivienne with the particular expression of a woman who has simply lived long enough to recognize exactly what she is looking at. Robert stood and insisted the food be passed again, fully, properly, to everyone. I was handed a full plate. The honey butter rolls I had made were passed and eaten, and Carol said, in a voice that carried across the table, that they were extraordinary, and she would like the recipe. I gave it to her. She typed it into her phone right at the table while the candles burned down, and the children came back in from the other room, and someone served the pecan pie. The last hour of that Thanksgiving was not warm in the way that storybook holidays are warm. It was something more honest, the particular temperature of a room that has just received a truth it cannot undo and is learning to carry the weight of it in real time. Vivienne called Marcus on the Sunday following 3 days later. He told me about it while we washed the dishes together that evening, the way we always do, him washing and me drying. She had called to say that she had not understood the full arrangement, that she was grateful, that she was ashamed of what she had not known, and of how long she had been operating on an assumption that had been wrong. Marcus said she cried. He said it was the uncomfortable, real kind, not the kind that performs itself. She asked whether I was going to stop the transfers. She sounded frightened when she asked. I told Marcus the payments continue until Robert and Vivienne have a manageable path forward, because I was not doing this to punish her. I never was. The house was still standing, and Robert deserved to stay in it, and I was not going to become someone who dismantles things simply because the people inside them had not treated me well. In the days after Thanksgiving, the family processed what had happened in the ways that families do, privately, imperfectly, unevenly. Carol called me on a Saturday morning, the first time she had ever called me directly, and said, "I want you to know I heard you at that table. And I want you to know I should have said something sooner at dinners when I saw what was happening." I said, "Thank you, Carol. I meant it. It was not nothing." Leonard sent a short handwritten note to our mailbox that arrived on a Tuesday, 3 sentences. He said he had watched his sister for decades and had made his peace with her ways, and he had not understood until that Thanksgiving dinner how those ways had landed on someone who did not have, though, same 30 years of context. He said he was glad I was in the family. I read it 3 times and put it in a drawer with some other things I wanted to keep. Robert called me on a Wednesday evening and asked if I would be willing to sit down with him and Dorothy, once the new year had settled, to talk through what a realistic path forward for the house looked like. He said, "I want to understand what you have been carrying, and what a fair resolution looks like. Not for us. For you. That was the conversation I had not known I needed someone to start. I said yes. Of course I said yes. The restructuring conversation that Dorothy helped facilitate in January was 2 hours long and covered everything. Robert's pension income, their regular expenses, the line of credit, the primary mortgage, a realistic timeline for when they could absorb the full payment on their own. And what, if anything, I wanted to hold on to in terms of formal acknowledgement of what had been contributed. I did not want the money back. I never had. I wanted what Dorothy put into the letter of record. A written acknowledgement that the payments had been made, by whom, and with what intent. Robert signed it, Vivienne signed it. It went into the file, and then we built a plan that gave them 18 months to close the gap. They are on track. The house is standing. Dorothy checks in quarterly. That is the shape of a real resolution, not a perfect one, not a cinematic one, but a real one. Vivienne came to our house on a Saturday in early December. She had never come before. In 2.5 years of marriage, she had always received us at her table, always controlled the room she invited us into, always held the home court. She stood at our front door in her winter coat, hair pinned, hands at her sides, and pressed the doorbell. When I opened it, she looked at me differently than she ever had, not diminished exactly, more like a woman who has been looking at something through a particular lens for a long time, and has just taken the lens off and is seeing the actual shape for the first time. She said, "I owe you a real conversation." I said, "Come in, Vivienne." I made tea. 2 mugs on the kitchen table. I sat across from her and waited. What she said was long and not entirely elegant and more honest than I had expected. She said she had treated me as someone whose presence in the family was conditional, that she had done it deliberately and constructed reasons for it that had not held up under the weight of what I laid on that Thanksgiving table. She talked for a while. I listened to all of it. I said, "Thank you for coming." And I meant it in the precise way that I said it, not as closure, not as forgiveness completed, but as acknowledgement that she had made the trip and done the harder thing. Healing does not arrive all at once. It is a direction you start moving in. We were, for the first time, facing the same direction. I want to speak directly to you now. If you are the woman in your family who carries quietly, who funds things that get credited to someone else, who has been showing up to tables where you are treated like furniture and told in the language of bread baskets and plate sizes exactly what your worth is supposed to be, I want you to hear this. Your patience is not weakness. It is strategy, if you use it correctly. Your documentation is not paranoia. It is protection. Your stillness in moments that deserved a reaction is not defeat. It is the discipline of someone who has decided that the moment belongs to her and is not going to spend it on anything smaller than what she has planned. The moment I put that certified bank statement on Vivienne's Thanksgiving table, I did not feel what revenge stories are supposed to feel like. I did not feel triumph. I felt something quieter. I felt like a woman who had waited long enough and chosen well, who had let the numbers say the thing that words never quite could, in a room too full for anyone to look away. Numbers do not revise themselves. They do not shift depending on who is telling the story. They sit there and tell the truth. That is what I needed. Not a scene. Not a raised voice. Just a certified document and 18 people who were now witnesses. The Calloway house is still standing. The payments continued through the winter and into a spring restructuring plan that Dorothy helped Robert and Vivienne put in place. A plan with a realistic timeline and no dependence on anyone's generosity beyond what had already been given. Robert gives me a full hug at the door now and uses my name every time. Vivienne and I have dinner together, just the two of us, once a month on Wednesday evenings. We alternate between her kitchen table and mine. Some of those dinners are easy and some of them are not, and both of those things are real, and I show up for both. Priye called me in January, said she had been sitting with what she said at that restaurant and that she was genuinely ashamed of it. I said, "I know, let us keep moving. Marcus and I are building something that belongs to both of us. The honey butter rolls appear at every holiday now. I bring a full basket. I always get a full plate. So I want to ask you something, and I mean this genuinely. If you had been in my position for 2 years and 3 months, carrying something this significant without recognition or acknowledgement, would you have said something sooner? Or would you have waited the way I did, choosing the room and the moment and the witnesses yourself? Tell me in the comments. Because every woman who has ever been handed a small plate at a big table, while quietly being the reason the table still exists, deserves to be part of this conversation. And I want to hear from you. Thank you for being here and for sitting with me through this one. I mean that in the way that things are sometimes meant beyond the words we use for them. If this story reached something in you, if it made you feel less alone in a dynamic you have been navigating without anyone naming it, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. This channel exists because we believe that the women who carry the most are the ones who most deserve to be heard. Please subscribe if you have not already. Hit the bell so you do not miss what comes next. New episodes every single day for the woman who has been underestimated, overlooked, or quietly written off by the people who should have known her better. Your presence here, your comments, your shares, they mean more than a closing line can carry. I will see you in the next one.